Alright, what is up YouTube? Back at it again with another fighting game discussion video. So today's video, I actually wanted to talk about what is the hardest fighting game of all time. Now this idea actually starts from something that I did a long time ago. I remember, I think Team Spooky actually posted a VOD. It was like a tournament that Yipes and Chris Matrix hosted a while back, right? And they hosted a tournament of Marvel vs. Capcom 2. And I remember watching it thinking, wow, like this game still looks so great. And I remember seeing all the people like around and everyone playing it and having such a great time and thinking, wow, like I really wish, we had MVC2 tournaments like in modern fighting game events nowadays, right? Like much like they do with Smash Melee. And I remember commenting on that video, I said, wow, I really wish we could see the Melee treatment happen with Marvel vs. Capcom 2, where we would see a lot of tournaments for it still today in a lot of modern fighting game tournament events, etc, etc. And when I posted that comment, it somehow sparked this war in the comments section of people arguing over which fighting game is harder. And I don't know why or how that even happened. And for some reason, people were blaming me, and somehow people taking out their anger on me saying, oh, you've never played Melee or done, all the combos and stuff. I was like, bro, like how, like it was just so weird. And like a lot of people that, spread hate in the YouTube comments are literally just, oh my God, like so annoying, so lame. They have no life and, all they do is exist in the YouTube comments, which is kind of annoying, kind of lame. But yeah, you could tell a lot of them are just down bad and they just want to type out their whole life into a paragraph essay in the YouTube comments, because that's really all they have going for them. But I digress. So yeah, I kind of just ignored a lot of those comments, but that did always make me wonder which fighting game is harder, right? Because a lot of those comments were pretty divisive, and a lot of people saying Melee is harder, a lot of people saying Marvel vs. Capcom 2 is harder when it comes to the combos and the execution. I never really played Melee like that. I don't really like Melee like that, but I do know that from what I've heard, there's a lot of crazy stuff in Melee, and I do know that there's a lot of crazy stuff in MVC2. But to say that one is harder than the other is very tricky. When it comes to just overall, what's the hardest fighting game of all time, there's a lot of other fighting games up for discussion. A lot of times when you ask which fighting game is the hardest, people bring up Tekken. And to be honest, there are parts of Tekken that I do think are very hard to grasp, but at the same time, I don't know if I would say Tekken is that hard in my personal opinion. I feel like every time I play Tekken, like, don't get me wrong, I'm nowhere near any good at Tekken. If you've seen me play Tekken, I play it very basic, I'm not really good at it. But I also feel like when it comes to just learning combos and stuff like that, it's not that crazy. Like you can do some pretty crazy stuff in Tekken and some pretty long, ground juggling combos and stuff like that with not that much effort, if I'm being honest. But I do think that when it comes to actually trying to understand everything about Tekken, and honestly for me, something that's always been kind of an issue and kind of something that's made my level of understanding for Tekken stagnant is the pure concept of like, okay, each face button on the controller controls a different limb of your character. Like that to me just never quite sticks and never properly like sticks with me, to where I'm like, okay, this is gonna do this is gonna do that. Like I just kind of press buttons and memorize what the buttons do, but it never actually sticks with me that each button is a different limb on the character. Like that never actually connects with me. And just the pure concept of Tekken, and in that sense, I never actually fully grasped. So I never can really hop from character to character and be like, okay, I can do this and that and this and that. Like I feel like I just don't have that firm grasp of like the base of understanding of Tekken and its fighting system. So I do think that that is pretty hard to grasp. But at the same time, again, combos don't really seem all that hard with Tekken, if you ask me. And I do feel like people can pick it up pretty easily, at least in that sense, in the combo sense. But yeah, again, for me personally, I haven't been able to fully grasp Tekken as much as others. And I do think that in that sense, it is pretty hard to grasp and pretty hard as a fighting game to understand. So Tekken is definitely up there when it comes to the hardest fighting game. And then if we talk about what's the hardest fighting game, it definitely comes down to like what's the hardest competition of fighting games out there, right? Because you can definitely pick up a fighting game and be like, oh, this isn't so bad. But then once you see the level of competition and how far they've gone, and then you actually play against someone and get shitted on, you realize, okay, no, this game is really hard, right? And I think when it comes to that, Skullgirls has got to be up there, right? Like the Skullgirls scene has just progressed that game so much that I feel like even though there is a pretty in-depth tutorial for the game and the understanding of it, it's just like nowhere near the level of play that the players have taken that game to, right? To where I feel like if you get into Skullgirls now and you pick it up and you know, you're like, okay, I kind of get this, you're just gonna get shitted on by players that have been playing the game since it came out in 2012, right? So there's definitely that factor of like, okay, the level of competition and how far players have gone, and that can also kind of come down to how long the game has been out. Every time a fighting game comes out, right, the early stages of the game is nowhere near the meta of how the game will become towards the end, right? Take Smash Ultimate, for example. People were saying that Ganon was good, right? And then of course now you look at Smash Ultimate now, Ganon is just completely non-viable. That happens in a lot of games, right? Like Third Strike, there's only like a few characters that are actually viable in tournament, right? Same with Marvel vs. Capcom 3, etc., right? And that maybe kind of goes into a different discussion of like how games are balanced and, you know, which fighting game is the most balanced and most unbalanced, etc., but that's a different video. But yeah, another fighting game that I've always thought was like pretty up there when it comes to difficulty is the King of Fighters. Me personally, I feel like the King of Fighters has always been my personal like hardest fighting game because the inputs for combos in that game are like literally nuclear war bomb codes. Like it's just insane. Like the amount of inputs you have to do for different special moves into different combos it's just crazy, man. It literally boggles my mind, and I'm like, oh my god, I'm never gonna be good at this game because the inputs are just insane and the timing is so strict, and I'm just But after playing a lot of KOF 15 recently, I do feel like I'm starting to get a grasp on the game, and I do feel like maybe it's not as hard as I thought it was. It's just that initial learning curve that seems a bit overwhelming, but in actuality it's not that bad. Unless we're talking about KOF 13, in which case, yeah, that game is insane. You know, I've seen the trials, okay? I've seen the trials, and my goodness, it's oof. But that game looks gorgeous as hell, by the way. But anyway, yeah, I think that KOF 15 isn't as bad, but it definitely is initially pretty overwhelming. When you look at all the inputs and everything, it's just like, oh my god. But I do think that after learning a few combos in 15 and, you know, messing around with Vanessa and stuff like that, it seems like a lot easier to grasp, especially when it comes to combos, as opposed to something like Dragon Ball FighterZ, right? And I know you're probably thinking, wait, what? Like Dragon Ball FighterZ is way easier than KOF 15, but for me, I just feel like KOF 15 combos are easier to grasp because you just do this special move into that special move into this EX move, and you know what I'm saying, like you don't, like, it's not as long of a combo as opposed to Dragon Ball FighterZ where, yeah, each move to do them is very easy, right? Like, you know, the inputs for Dragon Ball FighterZ combos are not hard at all. Like, to do each move in a combo is really, really easy in comparison to KOF. However, the combos in Dragon Ball FighterZ are so long that I just forget. Like, I can't fully remember each combo for each character. Like, it's just, they're so long. I'm like, okay, wait, what comes after this? What comes after that? What comes after this? And it's just like a whole 40 move combo. I'm like, oh, I can't remember all that shit, you know what I mean? And it's just like, like I would rather do KOF combos, even though the timing is more strict and the inputs are way, way, way more difficult and stuff like that. But I would rather do those than remember a fucking 50 ass move combo. Like, that shit is, my brain can't remember all that shit, you know? And especially when you're in the midst of battle and like, and you have to learn 3 different characters, so like that combo might only be for that character and only depends on how much meter you have at that time. Like, it's a lot, honestly. My brain is hurting just from thinking about it. So again, Dragon Ball FighterZ combos are easy to do in theory, but for me personally, just remembering all those moves, you know, it's just a lot. It's just a lot, honestly. Like, even if I do it correctly, it's like, it's just a lot to remember, and you know, that's I think where I personally struggle a bit. Not to mention, FighterZ I think is a very fast-paced game and can be hard to play simply because there's so many mechanics in FighterZ, right? Like, I feel like part of what makes the hardest fighting game definitely comes down to the player itself and ultimately what that player finds hard. And I'll get a little bit more into that towards the end of the video here. But Dragon Ball FighterZ is a game that has a ton of mechanics going for it, and being able to remember all of those different mechanics and like, oh, you can do this at this time, you can do that, etc., might be harder to play versus someone who's just more so about execution and like actually just landing combos and stuff like that, you know? They might prefer a game like KOF as opposed to FighterZ because they might prefer a game that focuses more on combos as opposed to different mechanics than a game that has a lot of mechanics and requires a lot of memory to realize, okay, you know, you have to manage your resources while also remembering that, you know, there's this defensive mechanic, there's that offensive mechanic, there's all these different mechanics, you know? And yeah, I don't know, it just really depends on the kind of player you are and what you like to focus on specifically, and your strengths and your weaknesses that could probably determine what you think is the hardest fighting game, right? Another fighting game that I think could also be considered pretty hard, especially for me, is Mortal Kombat. And you might be thinking, Mortal Kombat? But yeah, in my opinion, I think Mortal Kombat is a little bit hard to grasp simply because the special moves in Mortal Kombat just feel so janky. Like, I feel like Street Fighter is such a great game for when it comes to just learning the basics of any fighting game, right? Like, learning how to play Ryu is like learning how to play the Adam and Eve of all fighting games, because Ryu, you know, he's got a DP, he's got a Tatsu, he's got a Fireball, right? Those special move inputs carry over into virtually any fighting game. So learning those moves, learning how to play Ryu can almost be seen as like universal. You can learn a lot in any fighting game just from learning how to play Ryu in Street Fighter. I feel like once I started to learn how to play Street Fighter and Street Fighter 4, that really helped me with how to play other fighting games. And you know, once I started diving into other anime fighters and, you know, Under Night and all these other different fighting games, I realized, okay, learning Ryu was so helpful, right? And I think that Street Fighter itself just has a lot of smooth input movements, right? Like when you do a DP, at first it didn't really make sense to me, but then when I thought of making a Z with my joystick, it just made sense, right? And it just felt so much smoother, and it felt so satisfying to learn that uppercut punch. You know, once I got that movement in my hands and my thumbs into my memorization, it just felt so satisfying to land that DP. Same with Hadouken, same with the Tatsu. Like, everything just clicked because the movement on the joystick feels so smooth. You know, you do a half circle motion, you do a quarter circle motion, you do a Z on the joystick. It just feels smooth. It feels like it goes somewhere. It feels like there's a line that starts and a line that ends, and it feels nice. Mortal Kombat is like the opposite of that. It breaks all the rules of that. It goes from like straight down to straight up, or straight down to straight left, and it's just so like janky to me. Like, it feels just complete opposite of Street Fighter, complete opposite of smooth, and sometimes it really messes me up. Like, honestly, it really messes me up sometimes, and I'm just like, how do people do this, right? Like, you go from straight left to straight right and a button, and that's the special move, and I'm like, hello? Like, I would rather do a Zangief full-on circle spin SPD motion to do a grab instead of straight left to straight right and like a special move. Like it's just so, like, it's just not smooth. Basically, it's just really not smooth, and I hate it, and it's really hard for me. It's really hard for me sometimes. Sometimes it's easy, but sometimes it's like way harder to me than like Street Fighter inputs, and then I'm like so confused. Like, even KOF, like, yeah, there's a lot of inputs and stuff, but some of them feel a lot smoother because you just kind of go from one place to the other, as opposed to Mortal Kombat, where it's just like, it's like from one input teleport to the other, like within the input itself, and it just feels really weird, feels really janky. Yeah, it's just something that I kind of always forget whenever I switch from a fighting game to Mortal Kombat, and I have to kind of relearn, which sucks. So yeah, in that sense, for me, Mortal Kombat is a little bit harder sometimes. It's also hard jumping from fighting games that you have to press a button to block versus games where you don't and you just hold back. That can also be a little bit frustrating. Same with if you're going from 3D fighters to 2D fighters, you know, there's a lot more you have to look out for, stuff like that, sidestepping, you know, there's just a whole other layer to the movement and everything like that, right? Platform fighters to traditional 2D fighters, like, that's also something that, again, you know, now you have to look out for things on the ground and getting knocked down off the stage into the ground. Like, you know, there's just different things, right? No fighting game is the same, but at the same time, that's why we love them all. But yeah, it's just ultimately what it comes down to is the hardest fighting game for you is going to be based on what kind of player you are, right? Like, if you are a player that is very execution heavy, right, then KOF, Street Fighter Third Strike, you know, Street Fighter 4, all these fighting games that require precise timing and stuff like that, those aren't going to be an issue for you because you're that kind of execution monster. You love to be in the lab practicing one frame links, practicing all these very execution heavy moves and characters, and you love doing that stuff, right? But maybe because you are that kind of player, you're not the kind of player that likes to, you know, worry about all these different mechanics in the fighting game. And you're not the kind of player that can remember, oh hey, you have to manage your resources properly, you have to watch out for this thing that this character has that no other character has. You know, you're not that kind of player that can remember all these things. You're the kind of player that's more like a machine, and you like to just get in there and, you know, show the world the execution that you have, right? You might also be the kind of player that's more of a strategist, right? Like in UMVC 3, there was a lot of different strategies in that game that people made from forming different kinds of teams and different combinations, right? You would see like Chris G make the whole Virgil, Morgan, Doom team, and that team clearly had a solid game plan of zoning out the opponent with Doom and Morgan, but then at the same time you have Virgil in the back as the anchor. And I just feel like that game had a lot of team combinations in general that showcased a lot of different strategies. So you might be more of a strategic player. You might want to find something that works, that is very cheap, that makes the opponent go, how do I deal with this, right? But then for you, you might not be very well at adapting to different kinds of playstyles and different kinds of characters, right? So for a game like Street Fighter that has grapplers, that has all these different zoners, you have to deal with strikers, you have to deal with all different kinds of playstyles. And depending on what character your opponent picks and what playstyle that character has, and you know, the archetype that that character is, the meta of the game and the matchup is going to change significantly, right? And you might not be that kind of player that wants to change how they're going to play and wants to adjust their game plan that much every single time based on that character that your opponent chooses, right? So that would be ultimately what I would say is the hardest fighting game of all time. Is it just depends on what kind of player you are and what your strengths are and what your weaknesses are. That really ultimately determines what is the hardest fighting game for you. But yeah, I'm really curious to know what you guys think is the hardest fighting game of all time to you, and what you guys would consider the hardest fighting game to learn and pick up. And yeah, I'm really curious. So definitely let me know in the comments below. And also, if you guys enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe. I want to do more content like this, so any support that you guys can give, I would really greatly appreciate it. I love fighting games, I love the genre so much. And you know, I just want to really give back to the community and just, you know, spread my love for fighting games here on this channel. So yeah, with that being said, thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and hopefully I'll see y'all in the next video.